The Rebellion of the New People's Army, or NPA, is an ongoing conflict in the Philippines aimed at overthrowing the Philippine government and establishing a communist state. The NPA is the armed wing of the Communist Party of the Philippines, or CPP, as well as the CPP's associated National Democratic Front, or NDF, a coalition of activist organizations. The CPP was founded in 1968 as a breakaway movement of the earlier, similarly named Philippine Communist Party of the 1930s. In 1969, the new CPP launched its rebellion after forming its armed wing, the NPA, or New People's Army, the new in its name referencing an earlier, similarly named communist militia, the People's Liberation Army, commonly known as Huks, that waged a similar communist rebellion against the Philippine government in the 1950s. The CPP-NPA's stated primary reasons for launching the insurgency are 1. The socio-economic divide in Philippine society caused by the extreme inequality between the wealthy elite, which comprises only 10% of the population but have a monopoly of the political and economic spheres, and the masses of poor workers and peasants, farm workers. And 2. That the Philippines, despite being supposedly sovereign and independent, continues to be under the neo-colonial, neo-feudal domination of its former colonial power, the United States, an unfinished revolution the rebels say they are determined to complete. The NPA Rebellion expanded gradually during the martial law period and until the mid-1980s, caused initially by the influx to the mountains of activists, students, and workers at the start of the militarized regime in 1972, and then by peasants and villagers in the countryside where the insurgency was based because of the widespread military atrocities committed in the rural areas during martial law. The rebellion reached its peak strength in 1987, with the NPA boasting some 25,000 to 30,000 regular and irregular fighters controlling some 5 million people in 15% of the countryside, as well as contesting control of other rural areas populated by another 5 million residents. By then, armed encounters with government forces saw the NPA regularly fielding 200 to 300 fighters in combat, particularly in Mindanao, and 100 to 200 elsewhere. Large areas, particularly in Davao and also in Bataan, Zambales, and Abra, came under rebel control, as well as the Cagayan Valley, where it claimed to have implemented agrarian reform, and the military was also verging on ceding the mountainous interior of Negros and Samar. In Manila and other cities, NPA operatives organized as so-called sparrow units targeted policemen, informers, and politicians, although a direct armed attack to cripple Manila, where some 600 communists operated from slum areas, was never launched. The rebels were never able to challenge the Philippine military in open warfare, as the NPA did not prioritize armed action but instead focused on recruitment and building up the organization. Toward this end, knowing that the mostly deeply religious Filipinos were averse to associating with atheistic communists, the CPP toned down its Marxist rhetoric and instead emphasized anti-government social activism, which allowed it to control or infiltrate hundreds of radical labor unions, teachers, students, workers, and peasant organizations, and even influence social activist Catholic clergy. Furthermore, during a period in the early 1990s of easing tensions and peace initiatives, the government began to allow the communists to participate in the drafting of laws in the Philippine legislature. This and the rebel strategy of urging its front organizations to foment so-called people's strikes in the cities to undermine industries, commerce, transport, and education were meant to create a revolutionary atmosphere in preparation for a final offensive to seize power in the capital, Manila. The insurgency is led by hardline communists and is carried out by armed bands that possess sound guerrilla tactics and benefit from the cover of the country's extensive rainforests, mountains, and wetlands to establish numerous bases. The rebels have also shown their willingness to tone down Marxism and stress social themes to increase their influence on labor, peasant, and other marginalized groups. However, the insurgency is disadvantaged by the lack of a powerful leader. As well, the rebels' anti-American rhetoric rings hollow with many Filipinos, and the country's isolated archipelagic geography makes arms shipments and taking refuge in foreign soil difficult. Early on, the NPA relied on the smuggling in of Chinese weapons, which ended in 1976 when China and the Philippines established diplomatic relations. The rebels sourced their funds from extortion money and so-called revolutionary taxes, from businesses operating in critical areas, and even from contractors of public works projects and campaigning politicians, while insurgent weapons come mainly from raids and attacks on military and police outposts. Initially, in the Cagayan Valley, the NPA attempted the Maoist strategy of establishing a permanent liberated zone, which was crushed by a military offensive. Since then, the rebels have dispersed their manpower and resources throughout the islands through guerrilla fronts for concealment, operational flexibility, and easy escape. As well, attempts to establish a united front with the Moro insurgency, a rebellion by Muslim separatists in Mindanao, have failed because of the historical animosity between Filipino Christians and Muslims. In the 1980s, while insurgent strength was rapidly growing, the NPA experienced widespread paranoia from reports that it had been infiltrated by government agents. A massive purge followed, where estimates of from 2,000 to 9,000 cadres were arrested, tortured, executed, and buried in mass graves, while thousands more surrendered, with membership falling by half that nearly destroyed the organization. Then in the early 1990s, the CPP leadership, desperate to revive the flagging organization from the impact of the global decline of communism and decimation from the 1980s purge, issued a manifesto reaffirming its core principles. Instead, the manifesto sparked dissent that led to the fracture of the CPP into two groups: the reaffirmists, who remained loyal to the leadership, and rejectionists, who broke away and which also soon splintered into many subgroups. Still, the rebels recovered from these setbacks and experienced renewed growth from 1995 to 2005. Since 1987, peace initiatives by successive Philippine administrations and the insurgents have failed to achieve resolution, and the pattern of alternating between negotiations and low-intensity conflict has continued since, which was further complicated when in 2002, the CPP-NPA was designated a terrorist organization by the United States, European Union, and others. More recently, the military has introduced a multifaceted whole-of-nation approach. That is, the insurgency is not solely a military issue, to try and bring the world's longest ongoing communist insurgency to an end.